Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Vishal, how are you this morning?
Very good. Nice to be with you here, Ted.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking a little time. You and I were talking. I think I met you pretty early on in your legal KM journey. I know you've got a past before pre-legal KM experience, but I think you were at Ackerman back in the day when you and I talked. We were AcroWire then, and we had some conversations. God, what was that? Like, it was mid 2010s, like 2015 maybe?
Very good memory. That's exactly when it was, about 10 years ago. I started at Ackerman towards the end of 2014. So it'll be 10 years this year in December in the legal industry. Good memory.
Yeah. And you, and then, so you and I have known each other a little while. We are InfoDash and Alston and Bird are in conversations now. Nothing official yet, but I think we're close to figuring out a way to work together. And what really was the catalyst for this discussion was the KM&I. I call it the KM&I handbook just because this is too many words. This big, thick Atlas Shrugged looking book that's excellent. But PLI, Patrick Dundas, and I, had the idea of there's really great content in here. Why not make it come to life and have conversations like this with the contributors? And your chapter was especially interesting because it deals with legal collaboration, which InfoDash is a legal collaboration platform. But before we get into that, why don't you give us a little bit of background? I know you got about 10 years in legal. I think you were doing some stuff in KM. Tell us a little bit about that history.
Yep. So we talked about the legal entrance. But prior to legal, I started in knowledge management very early on in 1998. This was back when Tom Davenport, he's a KM, like a godfather of KM, would write about knowledge management and cover the company that I used to work for at the time. And about 9 years in that KM consulting business, after that I moved into KPMG, then eventually Ernst & Young. And I cut my teeth in KM consulting and KM as a practice in those firms. The Big Four have always been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of just understanding where the gaps are in the corporate environment. And back then, even though the internet had grown away from the Alta Vista Yahoo days into something more sophisticated, it was still a very real gap, just identifying where knowledge sits and how to make it more useful, and frankly, then past that, how to make it a competitive advantage. So they've always been very true to that. I entered the legal industry, like we just talked about, in 2014, started my career as the Chief Knowledge Officer at Ackerman, then moved on to being the Chief Knowledge Officer at Hinge & Culbertson for a few years. And more recently, I've been with Alston & Bird as their Senior Director of Knowledge and Innovation. And like you said, we're most likely going to start working with InfoDash on one of our products here. It's been a great ride. I can tell you, there's never a dull moment. And even though I changed industries, I think knowledge management itself has evolved over the years. I know we'll talk a little bit about Gen AI because why wouldn't we not? It's just naturally evolved into so many things. We talked about knowledge management 20, 25 years ago. Now there are shades of innovation and actual client value and realized value and things like that. A lot of that seeps into our titles as well. And it's been a very, very interesting career so far.
So interestingly, I recently did an analysis. We've been in the legal vortex for quite a long time. We started as AcroWire in 2008. And I used to work for Microsoft. I was on the SQL team there and started consulting on the side gig, started making more money than the day job. So jumped out, started a business. And when we started working with law firms, naturally, SharePoint conversations and intranets just started to happen. So we've seen a huge evolution in how collaboration has taken place. And I think there's lots of interesting discussion points. So in the book, and again, the official title is Knowledge Management and Innovation, a Manual for Law Firms and Other Legal Services Organizations. The chapter that you contributed to with Sarah Miro was around collaboration. So we going back to the innovation point before we jump into the book, I did an analysis of. I still have this data from 2014. I took the ILTA roster and I asked the question. I said, how many roles out of the 15,000 members of ILTA in 2014, how many people have innovation in their title? So the answer is 16, surprisingly small number. So innovation really didn't exist 10 years ago. It was just a little outcrop of KM. But the reason I bring this up, and today I did also 10 years later, I'm going to have a post on this next week. It'll be super cool with graphics. And 10 years later, we have about 300 and there are about 25,000. Yeah. So 2,000% growth. There are now 25,000 ILTA members, at least as part of the ILTA roster. But I want to give you guys some props. I'm teeing you up here. So Alston and Bird, I think 4 of the 16 innovation titles were at Alston and Bird. Wes Settle was one of them. So you guys were pioneers in the innovation space. You really were. And, it sounds like that trend has continued. You've continued to grow the innovation functions. And is your role innovation now?
It is. And, I've oftentimes heard should it be a separate role? Should it even be a role? Should it not just be everybody's job, etc.? I think it signals 2 things, Ted, in the marketplace. And you've been a veteran of this industry as well, so this is not going to be an epiphany for you. I think it signals a couple of things. It is important for the legal industry, which has traditionally been recognized, and in some cases the recognition is warranted, as slow moving, not innovative enough, not looking at every possible space where you can do something better or efficiently, etc. So I think, first of all, it was important to signal that firms are going to be serious about this. And if you know anything about law firms, it is not that easy to change titles or to change roles, etc. There's a lot of thought that goes into making such a change. So the mindset changes first, and the action is actually after that when the titles are changing. And it's signaling not just to the marketplace and clients, but internally as well to partners. There are perhaps some partners who are on board and just get it, and there are others that probably need to be brought along. So I think it signals a very important investment and mindset that this is where we're seriously going to look at this, because it's not business as usual anymore. The business world is more complex every single day, with thanks to technology, thanks to so many other factors. So it is important to signal that both internally as well as externally, build that mindset, build the teams around it, have the right titles, attract the right caliber to the firm, et cetera, and sort of, build out of that. So I think your hypothesis is well-founded, because it might have started as an idea many years ago, and then people were like, well, no, hang on. This actually, if you start to build the role, the team, the mentality around it, then good things follow. So I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, and we were going to talk about this last, but let's just move it forward. I think because we're already heading down the path a little bit, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, having been a third-party observer, I think I'm objective, but maybe not since I sell into the space. But it has been interesting. So I spent 10 years in financial services, and financial services, that industry as a whole, is extremely innovative, but they don't really need to beat that drum, and they don't call it innovation. They don't have innovation teams at Bank of America. At least they didn't when I left. They have business transformation teams, and I was a part of that. But I do feel like the legal industry clients have said, I don't know if explicitly, but certainly had this message has been conveyed. You're not innovative enough. You're not keeping up. You're behind the times. And as a result of that, partners have said, we need to highlight all the innovation work that we're doing. And there's been a lot of innovation theater taking place where, maybe they'll stand up or hire a chief innovation officer with no direct reports, and or maybe change some KM titles to innovation and not really fully buying in. But I know that's not true across the board, but that dynamic definitely exists. It seems like at Alston and Bird, you guys were early adopters of this. I know just from our conversations, we've been talking to you guys about InfoDash for 2.5 years. I think we're finally getting across the goal line. But, I've known Wes for a long time, and I've had a bird's eye view. It does seem like you guys are really focused. Well, even in your hire, I think that bringing somebody like you in that has a consulting background, it's just different. You're not the only CIO or CKIO that came from outside of legal, but there's not many.
Yes.
Dave Boland at Ogletree Deakins came from Grant Thornton. He does, and man, what an amazing job he's done there. You guys are doing good work. How important do you think having that non-legal KM lens has helped the work that you do?
So I'm clearly biased, Ted, because that's the only lens I had. But I've not had JD envy, if I could call it that. I feel like because I didn't have the attorney training, I just listened very, very hard. I know I've been asked that question early on, like, has that helped or hindered, how you grew into the firm? I think because I didn't have that background, I just heard or more closely, listened harder, asked more questions, probably silly questions, but they were very foundational to my understanding. I was also probably given a lot of both because I didn't have a lawyer tag. I have friends who are, had tremendous experience being a corporate lawyer or being a litigator. When you move into roles of KM and innovation, frankly, especially at the leadership level, you need to have a very 10,000 foot level understanding and be able to dive in very quickly, but then pull out very fast as well, so that you're not getting into the weeds conversation with senior partners, etc., but you're able to both project confidence, but also hear what they're saying and convey that, yes, you've heard them, you understand, and you can play back the narrative. So I think consultative skills that I cultivated without, sort of unconsciously cultivated in my career have come to bear in this role. And I'm sure as we were, sort of young in our career, we were probably getting the right level of mentoring and training to build those kinds of skills. But when you shift industries and you don't know the lingo, for a moment, you have to just pause and take stock and tread a little carefully, and just make sure that you're asking the right questions. But yes, to answer your question, the consulting background helps only because you're just trained and taught and experienced in going in uncharted territories and making sense of what you have to do there.
Yeah. And what you had mentioned, or you alluded to, where innovation should live. Should it be a siloed function? There's a lot of talk about that right now. Catherine Bamford had a post a couple of days ago that where she said she's hearing feedback from the market that innovation is sometimes now being a bottleneck to innovation because, and we could theorize. I have some ideas on why that perception may exist. My top theory is that law firms are so all over the place, and KM&I sometimes ends up being a catch-all. In other words, we have some new initiative, throw it at KM, and the reality is, innovation teams, just like technology, have to apply some discipline around priorities. And yeah, okay, you're a squeaky wheel, you're a big influential partner at a firm, and you've got something that you want right now. And sometimes the answer is no. And
Yeah.
that is you know how difficult it can be to tell an influential partner at a law firm no. But if you want to align activities with strategic goals, you have to be disciplined about it. So that's my theory on why this perception of a bottleneck. I honestly don't think it's true at all. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll say, based on my own experience, and B, talking to colleagues, I'll say it depends on the law firm. At A&B, we're very fortunate to have excellent leadership that has actually engendered a lot of trust and created teams that work with each other very fluidly. So we're not jostling with each other for either control or saying, like, this is my project and I want the glory for this. And I think that is underplayed, how important that level of trust and collegiality is. And a fantastic example right now, and I've heard some of the same sentiment that you have, Ted, so I'll validate that sentiment does exist. And every time I've heard it, I've said to myself, oh my God, I'm so lucky to have the infrastructure. And it's not just built by accident. It is always built very deliberately. And if you're fortunate to have the right leadership in place that has the confidence in building good teams. But the way our teams work, we work so well knit. I will actually introduce us to vendors, to business partners as sister teams, because that is how closely we'll work with each other. We'll talk to each other about our projects. We'll talk about where the overlap is. How do we help each other? And the goal always is to A, come to consensus, and then B, work towards the goal together, not at sort of at intersections where we don't see eye to eye. Now, that is not to say that we always agree and we never have debate. We have healthy debates, and then we still drive to consensus and we make sure we're going in the right direction. In terms of influential partners asking for a tool and expecting that to be delivered, I think that also requires very cogent conversations where you can explain why something is important or not important, how it integrates with the rest of the infrastructure. Security is a big concern, as you can imagine. Top, Am Law 50 firm, security is going to be a concern with the profile of clients we have, with the profile of work we do. So I think it comes down to just having very good and convincing conversations. And when partners see reason, I just made this comment this morning on another call. I said, I have no problem working with lawyers because I actually rail against the rap that they oftentimes get, that they're difficult to work with, or you can't convince them, or they're hard to change. I actually think if you convince them, but you do have to come up with a cogent argument. You have to come out with the proper reasoning, play back the narrative of the pain points that they have, and do it with good intent. And I think they do listen, and I think they do change. But you have to do it also in a very collaborative way internally. One sentiment that I heard, especially with Gen AI, and I know we'll talk about Gen AI later on, but because it has been unleashed into the world as such a democratic technology, Ted, it is not necessarily the province of just IT or just the innovation team or just the procurement team and what have you. Everybody feels they know Gen AI, and everybody's gone to ChatGPT, Claude, etc. And what I've heard is in films, there have been either a lack of imagination or there's been too many disparate attempts at Gen AI. And like there's just not a connected thread that goes around the film. And I think that happens when you don't have the trust and you don't have a collaborative spirit bringing the teams together. And that can just be a bigger mess than you want to deal with, honestly. Um, so I think innovation being a bottleneck, unless somebody has made it too bureaucratic a process, we keep ourselves very agile, very open to listening to attorneys, and we take crazy notes, and we try to make sure that we give them an answer in very short order, Ted. Either we say, yes, this makes sense, let's proceed with this, or we'll take a quick look and we're like, no, this doesn't make sense, and for these reasons. So we're not leaving them hanging. And the last thing we want to be is a bottleneck. We're all about removing friction. That's our whole goal. So so yeah, we definitely don't practice a ton of bureaucracy when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act between, rather than bureaucracy, because that sounds so inefficient, but you have to apply discipline in order to not be constantly in triage mode, right? If you want to be proactive, it requires discipline, it requires planning, and that requires saying no sometimes, or at least
Yes.
not right now.
Correct.
And otherwise you're constantly changing directions, and it's really hard to make progress towards longer term goals. So speaking of AI, we're at such an interesting place right now. The Gartner hype curve is talked about so often, and it really plays out like perfectly every single time. And like right now, I feel like we are nearing the bottom of the trough of disillusionment, right? You got the peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, plateau of productivity. I've seen it so many darn times. But like, I just saw a post today about, I think it was Alex Smith from iManage. Yeah, I don't know if you saw that post, but it was really interesting because it was about Thomson Reuters and the confusion that has now been created on, like, where did the case text, like where does that AI live? Like there was that Stanford study that really shined a negative light on some of the inaccuracies and hallucinations that are taking place. And yeah, it kind of feels like, especially, and I really like listening to Alex talk and post because he pulls no punches. And, kind of calling it out like, okay, wow, doesn't look like things are going so great right now. So I don't know. Where do you think we are on the hype curve? Do you think have we hit rock bottom, or are we still digging?
So I saw the post too, Ted. But I think I think we're closer to a reality check more than anything else. Gardner has a very elegant term for it: trough of disillusionment. Agreed. I think it came out with such vigor, Gen AI, at the end of 2022. And the hyperbole, obviously, as usual, does not serve anybody. But I'll add a comment that is not my own, but actually Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. I was listening to them just a couple of days ago, and they were bantering about the state of AI and where that is. So I was like, oh, all right. It's not like they know what the end result is here either. So I think, hyperbole is dangerous only because sometimes you can inflate it to the level where people now expect it to, go to the moon by, you type in a few prompts and you're like, oh no, actually, it's not going to be able to do that. Maybe a quick car ride to the local library is more like it. It's just managing and, sort of setting expectations. And also, the pendulum swung so hard on the side of uh, the people who were cheering it on. And, we work in an industry where skepticism is also very real. You don't want it to swing too hard on the other side because it is a very transformative technology. It is something that did not exist 2 years ago, at least not in this form or speed. So it needs to be acknowledged, it needs to be harnessed, and it needs to be respected. But also not hyper to the point where people who sell, I guess you have to adopt a certain level of optimism around a product, but you need to maintain that reality, especially in our industry, because if lawyers have a whiff of sort of anything that can damage the credibility of something, it can sometimes be very hard to recover from that loss of trust, right? And trust gap is a real issue with AI, period. Legal industry or not, no one specific business. It's just the reality. It's just the way the technology functions. So I think there's a lot of we're still in a state of flux. And the podcast that I was listening to from Mark and Ben was essentially saying we still don't have the right answers. Should it be the big tech? They were not talking about our industry. They were talking about big tech like Meta and Google, and saying, should they be the keepers of the big foundational models and just keep creating these small layers on top of it? Or should actually many startups be funded and have a go at creating smaller foundation models for specific cases? Not that much more different than previous tech waves, Ted, when we had mobile apps, when we had cloud, when we had SaaS. I mean, all of these tech waves have followed very similar patterns, right? The VC community gets super excited. The tech community gets super excited because building tech is very easy now. Lots of money is funneled into it. And then there comes a time when things just settle down and you realize, well, some of it was smoke and mirrors, some of it was real. I think the citation you just made is a little bit more scary because now we're talking about a very significant player in our industry that's being questioned, like, okay, how much of this was real? There's also, not to get super technical on the call, but there's also a difference between precision and recall, right? And I think some of the Stanford paper was getting into the details of, yes, are you over engineering on one side so that it only gives us, it eliminates false negatives to the point that we don't have enough false positives. So there's a very interesting, sort of deep delve into this space. But yeah, for now, I would say we're definitely in the space of more of a reality check, which is a good place to be. I think it is. It's the place, frankly, where those of us in my role in firms have a better place to position these products to our lawyers. It's here. These are the things it can do. Here are the things it doesn't do very well. Let's use it sensibly. Let's use it safely, and so on and so forth. So it just makes it more palatable, Ted, also. You don't want something to be too perfect because that for sure is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Well, and I just feel like all of this, there's a lot of questioning, very valid questioning that's happening at the same time. Also with Harvey, right? There's been very open, candid, sometimes pointed questioning around, and, it does, as a casual third party observer, it is a bit of a head scratcher as to why things have been so dark around there in terms of transparency. And this is happening at the same time, right? Just in the last, I don't know, couple of months has I guess the intensity of scrutiny around where Harvey is. Why are there no public demos? What are the use cases? Why are you trying to buy VLEX? Like, strategically, tactically, lots of questions there. Then we have the Stanford study, and it's I think reality, to your point, it's like, I think all of the inflated expectations now are starting to, we're coming to realizations in reality, and it's going to be a longer we're not going to be able to click a button and overnight completely transform how the practice of law takes place, and or the business of law, or really any other business. It's going to be an evolution. ChatGPT hit the market with such force that and it sent ripples everywhere. And then marketers, I think you summed it up great when you were talking about how where this phenomenon came from. How did the expectations get so high? A lot of it is marketing, right? It's people are saying, oh, I mean, it's a hype train, and if AI gets more clicks, then I'm going to somehow incorporate an AI story. Even the FTC now, they call it AI washing. I don't know if you've seen where they're cracking down on vendors who are baselessly incorporating AI into their story when there's really nothing material about it. So I agree with you.
Or even large companies saying in their filings, if they say something that, AI will make this happen, when in fact that technology either is not as advanced, or frankly, they don't have access to the data that would make that happen. So they project a little too exuberantly. So they're coming down on that too. Yeah.
And they should. I think this is, but again, all of this is happening right at the same time, right? I mean, this has all been
everything, everywhere, all at once. That's right.
Boom. Well, that's a good transition into the collaboration story, because we at InfoDash have been very cautious about, I mean, we're long-term players in the space, right? Like, I host this podcast. I've been selling in this space since 2008. I have friendships with people like you that I care about my credibility, and it would damage it if we just started waving AI flag when, and there actually is an AI story to what we're doing, but we're being more conservative about how we discuss that. But today in the legal collaboration space, things are still very email centric, right? It's so hard to pry Outlook. Lawyers live in Outlook and Word, and it's understandable why. But looking at the future state of legal collaboration, we think that Microsoft Teams is going to play a pivotal role in the transformation from email to what's next, which is still, we could debate that, but there's also in the Microsoft 365 world, which is where we live, co-authoring. There was might have even been the same post where it was there was a discussion about, is co-authoring the solution for kind of the check-in, check-out contention, right? If we can both edit the document at the same time, there's no need to check it in and check it out, right? We can just edit it concurrently. And OneNote, like how do you see the future of legal collaboration? Even really the immediate future, the next 1-2 years?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ted. I think, so you mentioned a few traditional tools like email. As much as we love to hate it, I don't think it's going anywhere. The reason I think it is so ingrained is it is the one, let's just say, easy button portal to the outside world, right? We've all lived in the worlds of extranets and sort of other sort of very specific deal rooms, etc. All of them have required an additional layer of security, etc., which means passwords and multi-factor authentication. Not that that's a burden, but it can sometimes be a little bit of a block. Whereas an email is simply you whip it open and you send it and you're done. Having said that, just because it serves that purpose of connection doesn't mean it's the ideal tool for collaboration. And our needs have grown as a workforce, right? You and I are probably of similar vintage. Like, we've all been around the block for a few years. And so we do remember a time when email was still new, where there was still paper in the office, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're looking at a workforce that is multi-generational, they just work very, very differently. I have two grown-up boys, 21 and 19. Email is not their natural first place of communication or collaboration, right? I understand once they move into the workplace, it's going to be a different story for certain things. But for a lot of things, they will still collaborate over text, over other sort of, means of communication, chat, etc. So it's an interesting, I think, evolution, as you said, because the workforce is not static. We have a younger workforce coming in every year. So we have to give into that, both on the client side and in our own teams, in our own firms. What is the more preferred way of collaborating, but also the speed? Email feels like, well, if that is the main source of communicating to the outside world, your vendors, your clients, etc., do you really need it to be bogged down with every other, where are we having our team dinner? Like, does that need to be in there as well? Do you have to go through 20 emails of that sort in order to get to the ones that need, sort of significant attention? So I think from a collaboration perspective, and it's not just the quick hits, right? It's when you're building out a new practice. When you're building out a new practice, you want to make sure you're gathering research material, you're assigning tasks. You need things like OneNote, you need things like Teams, etc., where you can build the teams together. The conversations are there, the notes are there, the important files are there. You've just created a very quick notebook of a sort, both with chats as well as with actual research material, etc. So the world, again, the pace of business is so fast that just the static movement of documents or email back and forth is just not enough. You need something that can be more of an asynchronous chat and not crowding your email. Is still the main tool of communication with your clients. That nobody can refute that. That's still the predominant way you're communicating with your clients. And the other element that you mentioned in terms of, co-authoring, I think that is something that large DMS providers have started to incorporate within their tools, because that's the next place after email where lawyers live. So those features, those capabilities have already started to make their way in there. I think co-authoring in OneNote, etc., is also fantastic, and MS Teams, etc. They're just the need of the hour, Ted. That's just the way the future workforces, the current workforces, need to collaborate and work on. They just can't be sort of living and sort of building communication, building long-term notes in something like email. So there are a lot of means of collaboration, and I think to finish off this point, I'll say we were talking a little bit right before we started the podcast was working virtually in hybrid fashion. I believe, the the multi-generation workforce is one aspect. The other aspect is the reality of hybrid working now. You can't always rely on the entire team to be in the office the same day, even if they're in the same city, to collaborate on a new project, to whiteboard on a new project. I don't discount the value of that. I'm still old school in some regard. I think that's great. You hear from people, you see body language, it's wonderful. But the pandemic changed things, and some things in a more permanent fashion than others. So people will now question, do you really need to have every whiteboarding session together in a room? And the answer is no. There's lots of tools. You can absolutely, I hear so many companies, young companies, established companies in all virtual models. So are they not collaborating? Of course they're collaborating. Sometimes they're collaborating across time zones. So that's just the way of the future. This is the way work is going to be conducted going forward. Email is not dead and might never be, but it's definitely not the utilitarian tool for collaboration.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to go off script here just a little bit, but it's a topic that has been we've been contending with quite a bit lately, and I'd be curious of your thoughts on kind of the build versus buy So
Mhm.
obviously, Alston and Bird is heading down the buy path, and I think that's, I have been battling on several fronts, which is really a head scratcher to me as to why, but I don't know, maybe you can give me your perspective. So there will be vendors out there who send firms down the build path, and some of them are the actual, like Microsoft. Microsoft is telling some firms that they can build an out of the box SharePoint platform with no third party tooling like Infodash and no coding and build a viable intranet. And that's utter nonsense. It's never been done once in the AmLaw world. I've been in this space. We've worked with about 110 AmLaw firms now over the past 16 years. I've never seen that happen once. If it has happened, I haven't seen it. And,
Yeah.
but, and then, so that's kind of the pure out of the box play. And then there are other vendors who sometimes, for whatever reason, send firms down the just custom dev it, like partner with a company like what we used to be, which was AcroWire, and have them build a custom solution just for you. And that's like we evolved
The other
away from that.
extreme.
Yeah, like we evolved away from that. And the reason is because firms had so much difficulty maintaining the infrastructure, people, mainly people, but also disciplines. Like you have to be good at project management. You have to be good at engineering. You have to be good at product development. You have to be good at support. And also somebody has to be listening to Microsoft when they push new updates. Is this going to break any of our stuff? And then God forbid anybody who's central to your team quits or moves jobs and all of that knowledge, and you haven't done a good job, which law firms don't. Actually, many industries don't do a good job of, like, documentation and keeping that documentation up to date. So like that's a battle we're fighting now, and it's just a head scratcher to me. Like, why would you go down the build path? Like, I'm glad you guys are going down the buy for obvious reasons, but like, what is
Yeah.
your thought on build versus buy?
So I'll share a very personal anecdote, Ted, and you'll see the sense it makes right away. We just talked about this. I moved from the big four accounting firms into the legal industry. And for the first couple of years, it was a head scratcher to me why law firms were so close with their legal tech vendors, with their legal tech partners. I came from an environment where we built everything. If we were building a new audit methodology system, we would build it. And it was only that when I moved away from that environment and into this environment, I realized the change in perspective. It made sense for a firm like the KPMG or any of the other big four to do that because of the sheer size of people they had. If they had 30, 40,000 people in the US and a third of them, just rough numbers, are auditors, yes, it absolutely makes sense to build a custom tool for 10,000 of your own people, right? And that's just the US. Frankly, they would use the same tool in other member firms across the world. When I moved to the law firm space, what I realized was we have multiple practices with a myriad of needs, very different from each other. And you have an explosion in the legal tech space because there are people, entrepreneurial enough to go in and say, I'm going to tackle that problem and I'm going to create a solution for that. It would be so utterly silly to try to mimic that and try to do that on our own. We would not have the bench strength. We would not have the engineering capacity, caliber, capability, all of the above, right? And we would not have the wherewithal to support, even if we were able to build it, for all of these various needs that we had. And I realized the hard way, or with some time, and I grew to acknowledge and appreciate the need for being very close to technology partners, where it made sense, absolutely made sense to buy. And I think, you've got the right approach, Ted. I think doing custom intranets is unless you're just doing it to get an award for design or something like that, it has such little utilitarian purpose, because at the end of the day, it is a utilitarian tool. It is meant to be sharing information across the board, have that one portal going out to all of your applications and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic training tool, fantastic for companion sites when we're creating, sort of separate training, etc. I mean, it's got all these essentials. To create it into a sort of a behemoth, a white elephant that you now need to support, doesn't make sense. For the out of the box, I think on the other hand, especially, I mean, I'm just talking from the perspective of a large law firm, there's a certain expectation of our users, generally, of what a web experience should look like, what the UI, what the UX should be. Nobody settles for just plain vanilla anymore. So there needs to be at least a certain layer of something that doesn't look like it's just off the shelf, right? So I think you have the right approach from that perspective. You're in those meetings, you're walking in those shoes. So I don't have your perspective, but from the outside, I would say there is a certain expectation. We're in the business, both of us in the legal tech business, there's a certain expectation from our users on what the load speed should be, what it should look like. I mean, there's no going back. There's no going back on this train. We're too far ahead in the space of sophisticated UI. But unless there's no other place where you could spend those tech dollars, and I would be shocked. I would just be a wise steward of the resources and say, okay, this makes sense. It has to be a balance of functionality, design, and cost, right? Yeah, all of those variables are important.
Yeah, that used to be called the iron triangle. It was cost, speed, and quality. I forget. It's been years since I've seen that. It used to be an old project management concept. But yeah, so the way I frame it up is, if there is an opportunity to create competitive advantage from embarking on a journey like that, then it's worth the conversation. All right.
Yes. Yes.
If not, if you can buy like with an intranet, like if there are off the shelf tools that can solve the problem, you are gaining no competitive advantage by building it yourself. None. Zero. All you're doing is taking resources and focus away from areas where you could create some sort of competitive advantage, and you're overburdening your IT staff, your KM staff, and it's just it's just been a head scratcher. So I for some reason, as of late, I've been battling this, and it's just like, God, you got this. We planted the flag 5-6 years ago on. We declared a winner. It's don't build if you can avoid it, in any sort. And if it wasn't an economical, if there weren't economical out of the box solutions out there, then they have to be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to sell our product, right? If our costs were so high that they were prohibitive, nobody would buy it. So
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So this has been a great conversation. You're an excellent communicator. I'm really thankful that you agreed to be on the show. And this is the book that Vishal contributed to. I think it was chapter 4, which was collaboration. So go out, pick up a copy. I think we put in the show notes a link for that to happen. But I really appreciate you coming on, and we really look forward to working with you guys, hopefully in the near future.
Of course. Thank you, Ted. And the pleasure is all mine. We look forward to working with InfoDash as well. And thank you for having me on this podcast. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. We'll chat soon.
Yes.
All right. Take
Bye.
care. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by InfoDash.